Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in every woman's life when the echo of her own voice, long silenced, softened, or shaped to please, calls her back home. Not to the version of herself the world applauded, but to the little girl within who once danced freely, felt deeply, and believed she was enough simply by existing. Tonight, we do not gather to learn how to become more, but to remember what we already are. Because healing your inner girl is not only a return to wholeness, it is the very foundation upon which your feminine essence rises, untamed, unapologetic, and free. Within the depths of every woman's psyche resides a figure who is often forgotten, though never absent. She is the inner girl, not a fleeting memory or sentimental notion, but a living archetype, an essential psychic presence that forms part of the universal human experience. She is an expression of the archetypal maiden innocence, wonder, receptivity, emotional truth, and she exists not merely as a recollection of childhood, but as a symbolic force in the unconscious, influencing a woman's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors long into adulthood. This inner girl emerges early in life, before the ego is fully formed, when the boundaries between self and world are still porous. She experiences life with complete openness. She feels deeply, trusts instinctively, and expresses herself freely. In her earliest state, she knows nothing of shame, performance, or fragmentation. She simply is whole, vulnerable, and attuned to the pulse of life. In this way, she carries the essence of the feminine soul before it was shaped by cultural scripts or psychic defenses. But as the child grows, so too do the expectations of the external world. The voice of the family, the school, the church, the media all begin to shape the girl's sense of self. She learns quickly what earns approval and what invites rejection. Perhaps she is called too sensitive, too emotional, too dreamy, or maybe she is ignored altogether. In response, she adapts not consciously, but instinctively, forming masks to protect herself. She might become the pleaser, the achiever, the caretaker, the rebel, or the quiet one. But behind each adaptation lies a sacrifice, the slow silencing of her original voice. This silencing is not without consequence. The inner girl does not die. She recedes into the unconscious, where she remains as a fragmented or exiled aspect of the self. She becomes the hidden emotional core that continues to influence a woman's relationships, choices, fears, and desires, often without her awareness. When unhealed, she may show up in the woman's life as neediness, insecurity, overattachment, passivity, sabotage, or difficulty in receiving love. She might also appear in dreams as a crying child, a lost girl, or a wounded figure, symbols of the abandoned self that still longs to be seen, heard, and held. The inner girl, as an archetype, carries not only wounding, but also the key to healing. In her rawness lies the beginning of emotional truth. In her tears lie the gateway to feeling again. In her imagination lies the seed of creativity. And in her longing lies the map back to the feminine essence, not the socially constructed femininity based on appearances or roles, but the deep, living current of the feminine soul. This essence is fluid, intuitive, open to mystery, rooted in receptivity and inner knowing. It cannot fully emerge in a woman whose inner girl remains unseen or unhealed. To approach the inner girl is not an intellectual task. It is not enough to understand her. She must be felt. The woman must enter into a relationship with her as one might with a forgotten child, with patience, tenderness, and a willingness to listen without judgment. This may happen through dreams, inner dialogue, somatic work, creative expression, or guided memory. Often it is in the quiet moments in solitude, in grief, or in love that the inner girl begins to stir. She brings with her the original emotions that were never allowed space: sadness, wonder, rage, awe, hope. The process of healing her is a psychological and spiritual initiation. It is the first act of inner motherhood, the woman becoming the container for her own wounded innocence. This inner holding allows for the dissolution of old patterns. It begins to dissolve the hardened layers around the heart. It permits the woman to reclaim softness without shame, to express emotions without fear, and to open again to trust not with naivety, but with integrated wisdom. In this reclamation, The feminine essence is no longer something to perform or aspire to. It becomes an emergent quality, a presence that naturally arises when the psychic soil has been tended. Just as water returns to a cracked riverbed when the earth is softened, the feminine flow returns when the inner girl is welcomed home. She is not a remnant of the past. She is the key to the future self, the foundation upon which the whole, radiant, and sovereign feminine can rise. She is buried, not lost. The inner girl, the original feminine soul within every woman, is not gone. She has only been hidden beneath layers of adaptation, fear, and emotional survival. She lives still, deep within the unconscious, not as a distant memory, but as an active force that continues to shape our emotional lives, even in silence. Her voice is quiet, but it echoes in every moment we feel a longing we cannot explain, every time we experience a tenderness we don't understand, every time we retreat into insecurity or freeze in the presence of love. She is buried under the weight of what we were told we had to be: strong, pleasing, quiet, successful, accommodating, composed. As girls, we sensed what made others uncomfortable: our loud laughter, our sensitivity, our tears, our boundless curiosity. So we adjusted, we dimmed our glow, we put away our wildness, we hid our fears and pretended to be more than we were asked to be. But in doing so, we buried her, the part of us that once lived in wholeness and felt fully. And though we carried on, achieved, succeeded, or even healed, in the eyes of the world, something remained missing. Not because she is gone, but because we stopped listening. The psyche, like the earth, does not discard what is buried. It holds it, stores it, preserves it until the day we are ready to return and recover what was lost to time. The inner girl does not age as we do. She remains unchanged, frozen in the emotional climate of our most formative wounds. She waits through relationships that echo past abandonment, through self-sabotage disguised as perfectionism, through quiet grief masked as independence. She waits, and when she speaks, it is not in the language of logic but of sensation, a tightness in the chest, a sudden wave of sadness, a dream of being lost or left behind. Many women encounter her during a time of crisis, when the roles no longer satisfy, when the masks begin to crack, when a part of them no longer wants to keep performing. This is not regression. This is the beginning of return. It is a descent, an inner turning, a slow movement inward to reclaim the self we were once asked to abandon. To approach her is to feel again what we were once too young to process: rejection, abandonment, disappointment, confusion, fear. But it is also to rediscover wonder, curiosity, spontaneity, and desire, the untouched and unconditioned parts of the feminine soul. The world teaches us to rise, to move forward, to transcend, but the feminine journey is different. It begins in the descent, the turning inward, the courage to sit in the dark long enough to hear the whispers of the buried girl. She does not need fixing. She does not want us to become someone new. She wants to be seen, heard, felt, and held. She wants to belong again, not to the world, but to us, to the woman we've become. When we begin to acknowledge her presence, something starts to shift. There is a softening, a breaking open, a thawing of old emotional ice. We begin to see that what we thought were flaws, our sensitivities, our emotional needs, our fears of abandonment, are not weaknesses but messages, signals from the parts of us we left behind. The inner girl is not weak. In fact, she is the source of our deepest power, because she holds the map to our most authentic self. She remembers what mattered before the world told us what should. To unbury her is to unbury ourselves. The work is slow, often quiet, deeply emotional. It cannot be rushed, intellectualized, or outsourced. It must be lived, and in living it we begin to see that what we buried was not just pain. It was also joy. It was also the full spectrum of what it means to be alive, the grief and the playfulness, the fear and the longing, the tenderness and the untamed wild. She carries all of it, and when she is brought back into our awareness, those lost pieces of ourselves return too. In this return, the feminine essence begins to emerge, not as a performance, not as something we have to learn, but as something we already are. It arises naturally when what was buried is brought back into the light of our awareness. The girl who was silenced becomes the woman who speaks truth. The one who was hidden becomes the one who shines. She was buried, yes, but never lost. She is still there, waiting for us to remember her, to come back, to begin again. Early wounding leaves an invisible imprint that shapes how the feminine develops within the psyche of a woman. Before a girl has the language to understand what is happening around her, she absorbs the emotional tone of her environment through her body, her nervous system, and her intuitive perceptions. She is open, porous, and deeply impressionable. When she is met with love, safety, and attunement, her feminine nature grows naturally, fluid, expressive, emotionally intelligent, and intuitively alive. But when she is met instead with rejection, emotional neglect, dismissal, or conditional acceptance, something inside begins to fragment. The feminine essence, which was once freely flowing, begins to contract. This contraction is not conscious. It is an instinctual, protective reaction. If crying was punished, she learns to withhold tears. If her playfulness was mocked, she learns to quiet her joy. If her emotional needs were unmet or shamed, she learns to need less, or at least appear that way. Over time, the spontaneous qualities of the feminine are replaced by adaptations designed for survival, being good, being quiet, being helpful, being pleasing. These identities become her armor, but they are not her truth. They are born of necessity, not authenticity, and within the unconscious, the feminine begins to lose her natural form. The early wounding may come from obvious sources, trauma, abandonment, instability, or from more subtle dynamics that are harder to name, emotional unavailability, perfectionism, chronic invalidation, or the pressure to grow up too fast. These experiences teach the girl that who she truly is may not be acceptable or safe. She splits from aspects of herself, burying emotional needs, desires, and expressions that once flowed freely. What remains visible to the world is only part of her, a persona crafted for approval and belonging. What gets hidden becomes the shadow of the feminine, the emotional, intuitive, sensual parts that were once intrinsic to her being. As she grows, the wounds do not vanish. They take root in the unconscious, shaping her sense of self and her relationships. She may find herself anxious in intimacy, unable to express her needs, fearing abandonment, or constantly trying to prove her worth. These are not flaws. They are echoes of the early injuries that taught her it was not safe to be fully feminine. The part of her that once reached for connection now guards against it. The part that once knew how to receive now insists on doing everything alone. The part that once trusted life now braces against it. These patterns can feel like personality traits, but they are really strategies, evidence of how the wounded feminine has adapted to survive in a world that did not hold her fully. This distortion of the feminine runs deeper than behavior. It affects the inner experience of being a woman. The feminine essence, when healthy, is not only about softness. It is also about openness, flow, creativity, and a deep sense of being rooted in emotional truth. When early wounds are left unhealed, the feminine becomes distorted, either overexpressed as emotional chaos, manipulation, and reactivity, or underexpressed as emotional numbness, detachment, and control. Neither is the true feminine. Both are symptoms of the same root injury. The inner girl who learned it was not safe to feel, express, or exist as she truly was. Healing the early wounding begins with recognizing its presence, not to blame, but to understand. The feminine cannot be reclaimed through external changes alone. It must be re-embodied through emotional repair. The woman must learn to create internally what was once missing externally: safety, nurturance, and presence. She must meet the wounded girl within her and begin to feel what was once unfelt, speak what was once silenced, and grieve what was once lost. This is not a linear journey, and it cannot be rushed. The nervous system, shaped by early experiences, needs time to learn that it is now safe to feel again, to trust again, to open again. As the early wounds are seen and tended to, the feminine begins to shift. It becomes less about managing and more about allowing, less about proving and more about being. The woman no longer has to suppress her sensitivity, her intuition, or her desire to connect. She learns that these are not weaknesses, but essential expressions of her essence. She no longer needs to armor herself against love. She can receive, she can soften, she can stand in her full presence without fear of collapse or abandonment. In this way, the distorted feminine is slowly unwound, not through effort or force, but through deep inner reparenting and emotional integration. What once protected her becomes unnecessary. What was once exiled begins to return. And the feminine, no longer wounded, begins to unfold in its natural, radiant form. Integration requires descent. Not a metaphorical descent into despair or passivity, but a sacred, necessary movement downward and inward into the very depths of the psyche, where the unconscious resides and where the forgotten self still waits. This descent is not encouraged in a world that values progress, surface solutions, and constant motion. The culture rewards ascent, achievement, elevation, clarity, control. But the soul, especially the feminine soul, does not follow the logic of the linear path. It follows the rhythm of cycles, the turning inward, the dissolution that must precede rebirth. And for any woman who seeks to heal, to become whole, to reclaim the essence she lost through conditioning or trauma, the descent is not optional. It is the way. There is a point in every inner journey where the light of the surface no longer satisfies, where the tools of logic, performance, and perfection begin to fail. The woman senses that something essential is missing. She may feel disconnected, restless, reactive, or numb. She may have done the work, read the books, gone to therapy, adopted spiritual practices, yet still feel something hollow inside. That hollowness is not failure. It is the call to descend. It is the soul signaling that the real work does not live in the intellect, but in the body, in the buried grief, in the memories not fully felt, in the fragments that still live in shadow. The descent often begins with discomfort, an unraveling, a disruption, an event that forces her inward. It might be heartbreak, loss, fatigue, or simply a deep inner ache that cannot be ignored. Something cracks open, and in that space the truth begins to seep through. The descent is rarely dramatic. Often it is subtle and slow, taking place in quiet moments when she allows herself to stop performing, to stop explaining, to stop needing to have it all together. In those moments she meets herself, not the version she built to survive, but the version she left behind to do so. To integrate the feminine, she must be willing to enter the emotional underworld and reclaim what was lost there. She must sit with the parts of her that feel too messy, too fragile, too intense. These are not errors in her design. They are the sacred materials of her becoming. What has been rejected must be witnessed. What has been silenced must be given voice. This process is not clean or linear. It is full of contradictions, regressions, and revelations. She may feel worse before she feels better. She may resist. She may want to return to the surface where things are more predictable, where pain can be bypassed and image maintained. But the descent is not about being safe. It is about being real. There is power in this underworld. There is medicine in the darkness. In this sacred space, the woman begins to understand that her wounds are not just places of pain. They are portals. Each sorrow, each unmet need, each suppressed rage contains information. Beneath the suffering lies the shape of the self she was always meant to become. But to reach it, she must stop running from the discomfort. She must feel the grief she never got to express. She must allow her body to tremble, her heart to break, her illusions to dissolve. Only then can she retrieve the pieces of her soul scattered by years of disconnection. This is the work of integration, to gather all of who she is, not just the parts that please others or meet expectations. She learns to bring love to the abandoned child, compassion to the scared adolescent, presence to the woman who has carried too much for too long. The descent is not a descent into weakness. It is a descent into depth. It is a reclaiming of the emotional body, of the sacred chaos that gives birth to new forms. Through this inward movement, she remembers that the feminine does not rise through force. It rises through surrender. It unfolds not in perfection, but in presence. The descent is where she stops negotiating with her truth. It is where she unhooks from external validation and begins to root into the authenticity of her own inner world. Here she no longer abandons herself to be loved. She no longer shames herself to be accepted. She remembers, not just cognitively, but cellularly. Her body, once numbed by fear or tension, begins to feel again. Her voice, once silenced by doubt, begins to speak again. The fractured parts of her being slowly weave themselves back together, and as she descends, she also begins to rise, but not in the old way. This rising comes from within, born not of performance, but of wholeness. Wholeness is the goal, not perfection. Perfection is the illusion that has kept many women trapped in cycles of performance, self-rejection, and emotional disconnection. It is an external standard shaped by culture, family, and inherited ideals that seduces the mind but starves the soul. Wholeness, on the other hand, is rooted in reality. It embraces the totality of who we are, the light and the shadow, the strength and the softness, the clarity and the confusion. It allows space for contradiction, for vulnerability, for growth that is not linear but cyclical, and for healing that is not always visible from the outside. The pursuit of perfection is often born from early wounds. A girl learns early on that her value may lie in how pleasing, good, or quiet she can be. She senses what earns love and what causes discomfort in others. She notices when she is rewarded for hiding her feelings, suppressing her needs, or smiling when she wants to cry. Over time, she begins to internalize the message that only certain parts of her are acceptable. Her joy must be measured, her pain must be hidden, her truth must be polished. She builds a self around these expectations, a version of herself that performs well, appears fine, and tries her best to be everything for everyone. But the cost of this perfection is fragmentation. In trying to be perfect, she loses touch with the parts of herself that are real. Perfection creates distance from the self. It demands constant monitoring, judgment, and editing. It says, don't feel too much, don't show weakness, don't make mistakes. It teaches women to be at war with their own instincts, to distrust their emotions, and to avoid anything that threatens the image they've carefully constructed. But wholeness asks something very different. It invites imperfection, it welcomes the mess. It says, you are still worthy, even here, even now, even in this. Wholeness does not require the absence of flaws. It requires the presence of truth. To live from wholeness is to turn inward and make contact with all the parts that were pushed aside in the pursuit of being good enough. It is to sit with the anger that was never allowed, the grief that was never validated, the confusion that was never named. It is to become curious about the behaviors and beliefs we've carried for years and ask, where did this begin? Wholeness is not found through achieving more, doing better, or striving harder. It is found through honest self-encounter. It is found in the willingness to feel what we have avoided and to embrace what we have been taught to fear within ourselves. Many women have spent years trying to be perfect daughters, perfect partners, perfect mothers, perfect friends, perfect workers. They exhaust themselves trying to hold everything together, often silently, while carrying the weight of invisible expectations. But somewhere along the way, the soul begins to resist. There is a deep fatigue that perfection cannot silence. There is a longing that accomplishments cannot satisfy. This is the quiet call to wholeness. It is not loud or dramatic. It often begins with a whisper, I want more, I want to feel real, I want to stop hiding. Wholeness offers a new way of relating to ourselves. It says we can be strong and soft, we can be healing and still hurting, we can be wise and still learning. It makes room for both the adult woman and the inner girl. It allows our humanity to take up space. In this space, the nervous system begins to relax, the heart begins to open, the old survival strategies begin to loosen their grip. We are no longer trying to earn our place in the world. We are reclaiming our place within ourselves. Living from wholeness changes the way we relate to others. We no longer seek validation through performance. We stop pretending to be what we are not. We begin to speak from a more grounded place, to love from a more secure place, to lead from a more honest place. We become less interested in being liked and more committed to being real. This shift is subtle but powerful. It restores integrity to the self. It aligns us with the truth of our own being. There is great relief in letting go of perfection. There is a softening that comes when we realize we no longer have to perform wholeness. We can simply return to it. It was never outside of us. It was never something we had to earn. It was only ever hidden beneath layers of fear, shame, and old conditioning. Wholeness has always been our birthright. It asks only that we meet ourselves fully, without judgment, and begin again from where we are. The feminine essence is not a performance, not a curated image, not a perfected mask constructed to fit into someone else's ideal. It is a living energy, a vital and deeply rooted presence that moves through the body and soul with grace, wildness, softness, and intuition. It is eros in its truest sense, not reduced to sexuality, but expanded into the full spectrum of connected, life-affirming force. Eros is the pulse of aliveness that binds the seen and unseen, the inner and outer, the self and the other. It is the connective tissue between worlds, the thread of mystery that brings depth to presence, meaning to movement, and feeling to form. This is the feminine essence, not something learned or fabricated, but something remembered and reawakened from within. In a culture that teaches performance over presence, many women confuse their essence with their ability to be desirable, likable, polished, or productive. From a young age, they are conditioned to shape their behaviors to be pleasing, to dim their emotions, to control their instincts, to be agreeable rather than honest. They learn to study the gaze of the other and adjust themselves accordingly. This performance becomes so habitual that it feels like identity, but it is not. It is an adaptation, a defense, a beautiful but painful survival strategy. The true feminine, the erotic pulse of life within, cannot thrive in the space of performance. It needs freedom, it needs safety, it needs surrender, not strategy. Eros, as feminine essence, does not seek to impress, it seeks to connect. It moves through the body like breath, like music, like tides. It lives in the way a woman laughs freely, cries openly, touches the earth with bare feet, or speaks her truth without needing it to be palatable. It lives in her dreams, in her longings, in her ability to feel deeply and allow that depth to inform her way of being. This energy is not fragile, it is powerful, but it is often buried under years of conditioning that taught her it was dangerous to be seen in her fullness. The world often fears what it cannot control, and the awakened feminine is not made to be controlled. When a woman lives from Eros, she becomes magnetic, not because she is trying to attract, but because she is fully in her own field. She is at home in her body. Her emotions are not enemies to be tamed, but guides to be honored. She listens to the quiet voices within and lets her life be shaped by inner knowing rather than external noise. She no longer performs femininity, she embodies it, and this embodiment cannot be faked. It cannot be taught in a formula. It comes only from the inner work of returning to the self, again and again, until the walls between mind and body, between instinct and intellect, begin to soften. The feminine essence thrives in authenticity. In slowness, in depth. It doesn't rush. It doesn't strive. It expands when there is room for it to breathe. When a woman begins to release the grip of performance and returns to presence, her energy shifts. She stops needing to be understood in order to feel worthy. She stops molding herself into what others find acceptable. She starts living from sensation, from truth, from her own internal compass. And in doing so, she becomes deeply rooted in herself, untouchable in a way that doesn't come from armor, but from embodiment. This shift is not always easy. The habits of performance are deeply ingrained, and they often bring with them the illusion of safety. But they come at a cost. The cost is disconnection, from self, from intuition, from pleasure, from aliveness. The feminine essence withers under chronic self-monitoring. It contracts when met with constant self-correction. It does not bloom in the harsh glare of judgment, but in the warmth of radical acceptance. And so, the journey back to Eros is the journey back to what is most real, most intimate, most alive within. To reclaim Eros is to reclaim the body not as an object, but as a sacred vessel. It is to reclaim emotion not as weakness, but as wisdom. It is to reclaim desire not as something to be managed, but as a compass. It is to reclaim stillness not as laziness, but as power. It is to reclaim sensuality not as performance, but as a portal to presence. This reclamation happens slowly, organically, in the quiet spaces where the woman lets herself be, not perform, not strive, not prove, just be. From there, her feminine essence begins to return, not as something new, but as something ancient and eternal that had only been waiting to be felt again. Reconnection begins with listening, not with analysis or judgment or the desire to fix what feels broken. It begins with a quiet inner turning toward the places we have ignored, the feelings we have suppressed, the memories we have avoided. The modern world is loud. It demands attention and offers endless distractions from the stillness where true healing waits. But the feminine does not thrive in noise. It awakens in silence, in slowness, in the spaces where we are willing to listen without immediately needing to understand. Listening is not passive, it is the deepest form of presence. It is a sacred act, a form of devotion to the parts of ourselves that learned long ago that no one was really listening. The inner girl, that living presence within, does not return through force. She cannot be summoned by willpower or controlled into speaking. She appears when she feels safe. She speaks when we create the space for her to be heard. Most of the time, she doesn't need answers. She needs to be acknowledged. She carries a backlog of feelings that were once too big to process, too inconvenient to express, too unwelcome to be received. These feelings didn't disappear. They went underground, forming the emotional undertone of our adult lives. They live in the tension in our chest, in the way we disconnect in intimacy, in the anxiety that arises when we begin to feel too much. And beneath all of that is a voice, still quiet, still waiting, still carrying truth. To listen to her is to stop talking over her with rationalizations. It is to stop dismissing her with phrases like "I should be over this by now," or "it wasn't that bad." Listening means giving her the same compassion we so often extend to others but withhold from ourselves. It means turning our attention inward gently without urgency and asking, "What do you feel? What do you need?" And then, most importantly, not interrupting the answer, not rushing to explain it away, not fixing it, just being there holding space for what arises. This kind of listening creates inner safety. It teaches the nervous system that it no longer has to defend against itself. It teaches the body that its sensations are not wrong or dangerous. It teaches the heart that it doesn't have to close every time something hurts. As this inner safety builds, more of the self begins to come online. Emotions that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Patterns that once felt automatic begin to soften. There is less need for control, for suppression, for perfection. The woman begins to inhabit herself more fully, not just in the mind, but in the body, in the breath, in the present moment. This presence is transformative. It creates a ripple effect that touches every aspect of life. When a woman truly listens to herself, she stops betraying herself in small, invisible ways. She notices when she's about to say yes when she means no. She hears the quiet discomfort under the smile she puts on for others. She begins to trust that her inner signals are worth honoring, even if they don't make sense to anyone else. And in this trust, her integrity returns, not the kind shaped by rules or ideals, but the integrity that comes from living in alignment with her own truth. The act of listening also restores a relationship with the body. For many women, the body has become a site of control, objectification, or numbness. Listening to the body means feeling into its rhythms, its desires, its fatigue. It means recognizing that emotions live in the body, and healing happens through embodiment, not escape. When the woman breathes, slows down, and tunes in, she begins to notice the language of sensation, the flutter in the stomach, the constriction in the throat, the ache in the chest. These are not random. They are messages, each one an invitation to come closer, to be present with what is, to respond with care rather than criticism. Through this deep listening, a woman reclaims her inner authority. She no longer needs to outsource her decisions, her worth, or her knowing. She becomes rooted in herself. Her energy changes, not because she is trying to be different, but because she is no longer abandoning herself. People may not know what has shifted, but they feel it. There is a groundedness, a softness, a power that comes from being in communion with the self. And this power does not come from dominance or control. It comes from intimacy, with her emotions, her body, her inner world. This is the foundation for releasing the feminine essence, not as an ideal or aesthetic, but as a lived, embodied reality. It is the return to the natural flow that was always meant to be there, the intuition, the emotion, the openness, the radiance. It cannot be accessed through striving, it is revealed through presence. And presence begins with listening, not just once, but again and again, in every quiet moment, in every breath, in every time we choose to be with ourselves rather than away from ourselves. Listening is the beginning of everything. Symbols and dreams reveal the inner girl in ways that language alone cannot. The unconscious mind, unlike the rational intellect, does not speak in linear thoughts or structured explanations. It speaks through images, sensations, symbols, metaphors, and dreams. These are not just random creations of the sleeping mind. They are messages carefully constructed from the deeper layers of the psyche, where the hidden self resides. When a woman begins the process of inner healing, particularly the work of reclaiming her feminine essence, she will often find that her dreams become more vivid, more emotionally charged, more layered with meaning. This is not a coincidence. It is the unconscious beginning to open, to speak, to participate in the healing. The inner girl, especially when buried or silenced for many years, will not always emerge in waking life with clear statements or memories. She may appear first as a symbol, a lost child, a crying figure, a room that has been locked, a familiar face from childhood. She may emerge as a recurring place in dreams, like a house with hidden rooms or a school or a forest. These are not just dream scenery, they are representations of the inner architecture of the self, shaped by experience, memory, and emotional residue. When these images are encountered with presence and curiosity, they begin to reveal the places within that are still waiting for integration. A woman may dream of trying to rescue a small child who keeps slipping away, or of walking through her childhood home only to find it abandoned, decaying, or unfamiliar. These dreams, though unsettling, are not signs of something wrong. They are invitations. The unconscious does not bring material to the surface to punish or frighten. It does so to be known. The dream of the lost child is not about helplessness. It is about the part of the self that still feels unseen, the original inner girl whose needs were unmet and whose feelings were never named. To approach such a dream with respect and willingness is to begin a conversation with the soul. Symbols are not fixed in their meaning. They are alive, specific to the individual, and must be felt rather than interpreted intellectually. One woman may dream of water as a symbol of fear, while another may experience it as a place of comfort. The key is not to reduce the symbol to a formula, but to explore what it evokes. What is the emotional tone? What part of the dream felt most charged? What does the image remind her of, not as a concept, but as a felt experience? These are the threads that lead back to the inner girl, the one who still lives in memory and sensation, waiting to be reclaimed. The feminine psyche naturally gravitates towards symbolic language. Myth, poetry, art, and dreams have always been the mediums through which the feminine has spoken its truth. These are not abstract forms of expression. They are deeply embodied. When a woman allows herself to feel her dreams rather than simply analyze them, she begins to open a channel to her intuition. This intuition is not fantasy. It is ancient, cellular, deeply woven into her being. It is how the inner girl communicates when she does not have words. The symbols become a bridge between what has been buried and what is ready to be known. Over time, as healing deepens, the dreams often shift. The lost child may eventually be held. The house may reveal a new, open room. The water may become calm rather than turbulent. These are signs not just of psychological progress, but of inner reweaving. The symbols reflect the reorganization of the inner world, the slow, steady movement from fragmentation to wholeness. This symbolic language begins to seep into waking life as well. A woman may find herself drawn to certain images, colors, places, or rituals. These are not random preferences, they are expressions of the soul's desire to make contact with itself. In a world that values clarity, control, and explanation, it can be difficult to trust this more fluid, mysterious way of knowing. But the feminine essence is not linear. It is not found in neat conclusions or surface appearances. It is deep, intuitive, symbolic, and emotional. Dreams are one of the purest reflections of this essence. They bypass the defenses of the waking mind and offer direct access to the truth of what still lives inside. And in that space, the inner girl finds her voice, not in words, but in images that speak louder than speech, carrying the depth, complexity, and tenderness of a self that has never stopped reaching out to be held. Healing is an alchemical process, not a linear journey from pain to perfection. It is a sacred transformation that takes place deep within the psyche, often invisible to the outside world, yet profoundly altering the inner landscape of a woman's being. Alchemy, in its original spiritual and psychological sense, is the process of turning what is base into what is precious, of transforming the unconscious material of suffering, shadow, and fragmentation into the gold of self-awareness, integration, and wholeness. In this light, the emotional wounds carried by the inner girl are not flaws to be erased, but raw materials for inner transformation. They hold the exact substances needed for the emergence of a deeper, more rooted feminine self. The modern world tends to reduce healing to a checklist, steps to follow, symptoms to eliminate, goals to reach, but true healing rarely adheres to such structure. It resists timelines and outcomes. It does not obey the mind's desire for certainty. Instead, it moves like a spiral, often leading back through old pain in new ways, not to torture, but to deepen understanding and release what remains lodged in the body, heart, and unconscious. Just as in alchemy, where matter is repeatedly refined through fire, water, air, and earth, the feminine psyche is purified not by avoidance, but by immersion in the very elements that challenge her. The emotional body, especially for women, is the crucible in which this alchemical work takes place. Old wounds rise not to harm, but to reveal the parts of the self that have been hidden or distorted. Rage may surface, rage that was never allowed expression in childhood, rage that was swallowed to keep the peace. Grief may pour through the body, grief for the times she was not held, for the words she never got to say, for the years she spent believing she had to become someone else to be loved. Fear may take center stage, the ancient fear of abandonment, of rejection, of not being enough. These emotions are not obstacles, they are the elements of transformation. They must be felt, not fixed. The alchemical process requires presence and patience. It cannot be rushed. It asks the woman to sit in the fire without immediately trying to escape. It asks her to trust the wisdom of her inner world, even when it is messy, dark, and painful. It teaches her that there is nothing inherently wrong with her for feeling what she feels. This shift, from resisting the wound to allowing it, is where the gold begins to appear, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in small, subtle ways. In the way she no longer shames herself for crying. In the way she begins to speak what she once hid. In the way her body softens when she chooses to feel rather than flee. Alchemy is not about erasing the past, but reworking it, digesting it, transmuting it into strength and wisdom. The very experiences that once caused fragmentation can become the foundation of depth, empathy, and personal truth. The woman who has felt her way through darkness does not emerge the same. She carries within her a quiet power, not the kind that needs to prove itself, but the kind that radiates from having faced herself fully. She becomes grounded, not because she has avoided pain, but because she has integrated it. Her presence changes, her energy shifts. She no longer lives from the surface of things, but from the root. This alchemical transformation affects every part of her life. Relationships become more honest. She no longer tolerates what dishonors her truth. She no longer abandons herself to be chosen. Her boundaries are not walls, but living expressions of self-respect. She chooses connection that nourishes rather than depletes. Her creativity awakens, her voice strengthens, her intuition sharpens. These are the fruits of the inner fire, the signs that something essential has shifted within, but these fruits are not forced into being. They ripen in their own time, through the continuous work of meeting herself as she is, again and again. Healing as alchemy honors the nonlinear, cyclical nature of the feminine psyche. It honors the body as sacred, the emotions as intelligent, the shadow as necessary. It teaches that there is wisdom in the wound, meaning in the mess, and value in the vulnerability we were once taught to hide. It returns the woman to herself, not a self that fits an image, but a self that is alive, awake, and whole. This is the true gold, not perfection, not invulnerability, but authenticity, forged in the fires of feeling and shaped by the courage to face what others turn away from. Through this process, she does not become someone else. She becomes who she always were, underneath the pain, beyond the fear, and within the truth that waited patiently to be reclaimed. Individuation is not merely a pursuit of becoming distinct or unique in the outward sense. It is the lifelong process of integrating all parts of the self, known and unknown, conscious and unconscious, accepted and rejected. In a world that favors clarity, logic, and linear growth, the path of individuation often reflects the masculine principle, upward, structured, directional, but individuation is also deeply feminine. It is circular, spiral, felt through the body, and often discovered in the dark. It is not about reaching for a fixed identity, but about dissolving what is false so that what is real may be revealed. It does not aim to perfect the self, it seeks to make the self whole, and wholeness, unlike perfection, makes room for contradiction, softness, pain, shadow, and joy. The feminine aspect of individuation begins in descent, not ascent. It calls the woman down and inward into her instincts, her dreams, her memories, and the feelings she was once taught to avoid. This descent is not a failure or regression. It is the sacred turning inward, the reclaiming of what has been left behind. It is how she comes to meet the inner girl, not as a childish part to outgrow, but as the emotional and intuitive core of her psyche that holds the key to her aliveness. In many women, this inner girl has been long buried beneath layers of performance and protection. She is the part that once loved without condition, felt without filter, and expressed without shame. To find her is to begin the work of inner reconciliation. This reconciliation cannot be done through thinking alone. It must be felt, embodied, and surrendered to. The feminine essence, which moves through the body like breath and blood, cannot be unlocked through effort. It must be allowed. In the process of individuation, the woman learns to soften the mental grip, to relinquish control, and to trust the movements of her inner world. Dreams become important here as they are the language of the unconscious, rich with symbol and emotion. The woman begins to notice what images return to her, what feelings repeat themselves, what archetypes show up in her inner landscape. These are not distractions from her healing, they are the healing. The feminine path of individuation often asks her to unlearn before she learns, to strip away the cultural expectations, the inherited roles, the beliefs she absorbed unconsciously about what it means to be good, beautiful, productive, or worthy. This unlearning is painful. It often brings with it a sense of loss of certainty, identity, and approval, but within that loss is the seed of something more honest. The woman begins to see who she is when she is not performing for anyone. She hears her own voice more clearly, and often what she hears first is sorrow, the sorrow of having abandoned herself for so long, the sorrow of not being seen, not being believed, not being valued for her truest nature. Rather than moving around that sorrow, the feminine path leads her through it. She learns to grieve not just for her own experiences, but for the collective wound of the feminine, how generations of women have been taught to disconnect from their bodies, to mistrust their feelings, to stay silent, to make themselves small. This grief, when honored, becomes a form of initiation. It softens the defenses, it opens space, it deepens compassion, not just for others, but for the self. It creates a fertile ground for the feminine essence to emerge, no longer hidden beneath armor or performance, but rising naturally from within. As individuation deepens, the woman becomes more than a sum of her parts. She becomes a living paradox, strong and soft, clear and mysterious, structured and fluid. She holds complexity without needing to resolve it. She no longer needs to be seen in a particular way. Her worth is not contingent on being pleasing, useful, or impressive. She belongs to herself, and in that belonging she becomes deeply magnetic, not because she is trying to attract, but because she is fully rooted in her own truth. She is no longer driven by the desire to be understood by others. She is nourished by her own understanding of herself. The feminine journey of individuation is not about arrival. It is about deepening. It is not a climb to the top, but a return to the center. The woman learns to live in cycles, to embrace the unknown, to make space for mystery. She no longer fears the dark. She knows it as part of her. Her intuition becomes her compass. Her emotions become sacred guides. Her body becomes her home, and in this state of being she no longer performs femininity. She embodies it, without needing it to be named or validated. This embodiment becomes her truth. It is not taught, it is remembered. It is not forced, it is revealed. It was always there, waiting, beneath the noise and the forgetting. Individuation, when walked through the feminine, is not a task. It is a return. The wound contains the medicine, not as a poetic metaphor, but as a psychological and spiritual truth. The very places where we feel most broken, most ashamed, most afraid, are the places that hold the key to our wholeness. It is easy to imagine healing as the removal of pain, the triumph over struggle, the distance we place between ourselves and what once hurt. But true healing, the kind that changes the soul rather than just the surface, is not found in escape. It is found in return. To return to the wound is to return to the source of our fragmentation, to feel again what we were once too overwhelmed to face, and to retrieve the part of ourselves that got left behind in the moment of hurt. The feminine psyche, deeply attuned to the realm of feeling, memory, and the body, often stores wounding in symbolic form. It may appear in the dream of being silenced, in the feeling of numbness in the chest, in the constant tension in the jaw, in the recurring attraction to those who mirror our early emotional experiences. These are not coincidences. They are the language of the soul whispering where the pain still lives. And within that pain lives the medicine, the part of us that knew how to feel, that knew how to protect itself, that held the original truth before it was overwritten by survival patterns and shame. The inner girl often holds these wounds in her body and nervous system, long after the conscious mind has forgotten the details. A woman may find herself triggered by something small, a tone of voice, a gesture, a word, and suddenly she is no longer her adult self. She is 5 years old again, or 12 or 16, frozen in time, responding not from the present, but from the unhealed past. In those moments, the wounded inner girl is speaking. She is not irrational or dramatic. She is unhealed, and she is calling for attention not because she wants to control the adult self, but because she wants to be included in the story of healing. Listening to her does not mean becoming her. It means allowing her to be felt, heard, honored, and held with the presence that was missing when the wound was formed. So often, healing is imagined as a return to light, but it begins in the dark with the willingness to sit beside pain without trying to make it go away. This kind of presence is the medicine the wound has always needed, not solutions, but safety, not logic, but love. The adult self becomes the container that the inner girl never had. She becomes the witness, the anchor, the mother, the guide. This internal relationship is the foundation for releasing the feminine essence, because the feminine cannot flow in a body that is bracing against itself. It cannot radiate through a heart that is still locked in self-protection. It cannot rise through a nervous system that is constantly on alert. The wound holds the tension, the contraction, the energy of all that was not allowed to be felt. But when it is brought into the light of conscious awareness, when it is allowed to complete its emotional cycle, something profound begins to shift. The very wound that once shut us down becomes the opening through which the feminine can return, not as a mask or performance, but as a living, breathing truth. This truth does not come from ideas, but from experience. The woman who has touched her own depths becomes soft in a way that is not weak, but wise. Her vulnerability is no longer a threat, but a strength. She does not need to explain herself or defend her emotions. She carries them with grace, knowing they are not problems to fix, but signals of what is alive within. She is no longer driven to control everything around her. She has made peace with not knowing. She trusts the cycles, the mystery, the timing of things. This trust, too, is medicine, a reversal of the deep inner belief that we must always be on guard, always be doing, always be strong. In the wound is also the power to connect. When a woman has walked through her own pain, she becomes deeply attuned to the pain of others, not in a codependent way, but in a compassionate way. She can sit with another's grief without needing to fix it. She can hold space for discomfort without abandoning herself. This is the feminine in her fullness, open-hearted, embodied, wise, and able to remain rooted in love, even when things are hard. The same wound that once isolated her becomes the bridge through which she connects, not only to others, but to herself. And so the wound, when faced with courage and patience, does not remain a source of suffering. It becomes sacred. It becomes the passageway through which the soul re-enters the body, the spirit reclaims the heart, and the woman becomes whole. The medicine was never somewhere outside her. It was always there, waiting, hidden inside the wound, asking to be found, not with force, but with gentleness, not with judgment, but with presence. The world rewards masks, but the soul seeks truth. From a young age, we learn how to perform. We learn which emotions are acceptable, which parts of us are lovable, and which must be hidden to avoid rejection or shame. We absorb messages not only from our families but from the culture at large, messages that teach us how to adapt, how to be good, how to earn love through compliance, beauty, success, or emotional silence. Over time, these lessons become unconscious masks, carefully crafted identities we wear to survive and belong. But beneath each mask lives a deeper self, one that longs not for perfection or applause, but for authenticity. And when the soul begins to stir, it does not want to be seen as impressive. It wants to be seen as real. The inner girl is often the first casualty of the mask. She is the self we abandoned to become who we were expected to be. She is the feeling self, the intuitive self, the expressive and imaginative core that once moved freely before it was told it was too much, too sensitive, too wild, too needy. To reconnect with her is to begin the slow and sometimes painful process of peeling back the layers we've built to protect her. It can feel disorienting at first, like losing our identity, but it is not loss. It is the uncovering of what was buried, the rediscovery of a truth that never stopped existing, even beneath years of pretending. Many women find that they have worn their masks so well, and for so long that they no longer know where the mask ends and the self begins. They have learned how to smile when hurting, how to care for others while abandoning their own needs, how to strive for external validation while feeling internally empty. These behaviors are not flaws, they are the strategies of a nervous system trying to stay safe in a world that does not always honor vulnerability, but what protects us can also imprison us. The longer we wear the mask, the more distant we feel from our own aliveness. Eventually, the soul begins to ache, not because it is broken, but because it wants to come home. Coming home to the soul means learning to tell the truth again, not just with words, but with being. It means allowing the body to speak what the mind has silenced. It means letting the tears come without explanation, letting the anger surface without shame, letting the joy rise without shrinking. It means saying no when we want to say no, even when others are disappointed. It means trusting our inner signals over external expectations. This kind of truth, telling, is not loud or performative. It is quiet and sovereign. It does not seek approval. It seeks resonance with what is real. The feminine essence cannot fully flow when we are contorting ourselves to be liked, needed, or accepted. It cannot rise when we are armoring against rejection or suppressing the very emotions that give it voice. Releasing the feminine is not about adopting a certain look or speaking in a soft tone. It is about dismantling the structures within us that deny our true nature. It is about choosing honesty over image, depth over surface, connection over performance. And that choice is radical in a world that celebrates personas over presence. When we take off the mask, we do not become less. We become more whole, more nuanced, more human. We begin to see that the soul never asked us to be perfect. It asked us to be true. And when we live in alignment with that truth, even when it costs us approval or comfort, we gain something that cannot be taken away, our integrity. That integrity becomes the foundation of our feminine power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that magnetizes. It is the power of embodiment, of being fully oneself without apology or disguise. As we live more truthfully, we also grieve more deeply. We grieve the years we spent pretending. We grieve the versions of ourselves we had to become to survive. We grieve the relationships built on half-truths. This grief is not a regression. It is a rite of passage. It clears space for the soul to take root. It softens the body so that life can move through us again. In this softened state, we begin to feel things we once blocked. Subtle joys, inner knowing, spontaneous desire, and quiet pleasure. We become receptive not only to others, but to our own essence. We begin to belong to ourselves. And in that belonging, the masks fall away not with effort, but with grace. Not because we forced ourselves to be authentic, but because we remembered we already were. The soul is never impressed by masks. It waits patiently beneath them, calling us inward, reminding us that what we are seeking, love, freedom, fulfillment, has always been found in the place where truth lives, where the inner girl waits, where the feminine flows unbound and undisguised. The feminine is soft, but not weak. This is a truth that must be remembered in a world that has long misunderstood softness as fragility and equated strength with hardness, with control, with dominance. But the feminine knows another way. Her strength lies not in resistance, but in receptivity. Her power is not in the force she exerts, but in the space she holds, the depth she embodies, and the way she allows life to move through her without needing to cage or command it. She does not conquer through pressure. She transforms through presence. To understand the strength in softness is to understand the nature of water. Water flows, yields, nurtures. It adapts. It slips through cracks, wears down mountains, carves through stone not by force, but through persistence and grace. And yet it is essential life, giving, undeniable. The feminine, like water, knows how to bend without breaking, how to hold contradiction, how to remain open in a world that tries to close her. This is not weakness. This is a deep, ancient strength rooted not in the mind's control, but in the body's wisdom. Softness allows access to what is real. It is through softness that we feel, and through feeling that we heal. A woman in her softness does not numb. She feels everything. She lets the joy move through her without needing to capture it, and she lets the sorrow rise without rushing to escape it. She trusts that emotion is not a problem to be solved, but a signal to be honored. In softness, she surrenders to the cycles of her inner world. She lets herself rest when the world demands performance. She listens inwardly even when the noise outside tries to distract her. She does not always have answers, but she holds space for questions. She does not force clarity, but she trusts in the timing of revelation. This trust is strength. In a culture that rushes toward resolution, that fears silence and discomfort, softness is an act of courage. It refuses to abandon itself for certainty or speed. It waits. It allows. And in that allowing, it creates the conditions where real change can happen, not the kind of change that comes from pressure, but the kind that comes from alignment. When a woman is in her softness, she is in her truth. And truth does not need to be loud to be powerful. It does not need to convince. It simply is anchored, embodied, alive. Softness also opens the door to intimacy, not only with others, but with oneself. When a woman softens, she feels the nuances of her body, the whispers of her intuition, the texture of her emotions. She becomes more available to the present moment, more responsive to the needs of her inner girl, more attuned to the wisdom moving beneath the surface of her thoughts. This attunement creates a quiet confidence. She no longer needs to posture or perform. She is connected to her own knowing, and that knowing does not rely on external validation. It comes from within. To be soft in a world that praises hardness is revolutionary. It is a reclaiming of a sacred way of being that has been dismissed, devalued, and misunderstood. It is to say, I do not need to harden to survive. I do not need to shut down my heart to be respected. I do not need to carry sharpness to be taken seriously. My tenderness is not naivety, it is depth. My sensitivity is not weakness, it is intelligence. My receptivity is not passivity, it is power, and when this softness is grounded, it becomes unshakable. A woman who knows the strength of her softness is not easily manipulated. She sees clearly. She does not harden in defense. She remains soft in truth. That softness becomes a boundary, not a wall, a boundary that says, I am open, but I am not available for harm. I feel deeply, but I do not carry what is not mine. I love fully, but I will not abandon myself in the process. This is not fragility, this is mastery. There is a profound resilience in the feminine that can endure what cannot be spoken, that can cradle grief without closing the heart, that can witness the pain of others without losing herself in it. She does not absorb everything, she alchemizes it, through her body, through her breath, through her tears, through her rest. Her softness does not collapse under pressure. It expands, it breathes, it remembers. It makes room for what is real, and in that room transformation takes root. So let softness return, not as a retreat from strength, but as the expression of a different kind of strength, one that listens, holds, flows, surrenders, and stays. One that nurtures what is true instead of trying to control what is not. One that heals through being, through presence, through the quiet, undying wisdom of the feminine essence. Healing the inner girl releases the feminine flow, not through instruction or effort, but through a quiet unwinding of all the places where we once learned to resist ourselves. The inner girl is not merely a past version of us. She is the emotional memory of who we were before we felt the need to shrink, harden, or perform. She is the felt sense of unfiltered presence, the part of the psyche that carries joy and instinct, trust and vulnerability. When she is wounded, when her voice is silenced or dismissed, the body closes and the heart follows. What remains is a life lived from the outside in, a life of roles, masks, and disconnection. And yet, when we turn inward and begin to meet her as she is, not as we wish her to be, the feminine begins to stir again, not as an idea, but as a living energy that once flowed freely through our bodies before shame or fear taught us otherwise. This return cannot be rushed. The inner girl reveals herself only in the presence of safety. She will not open in the face of pressure or perfectionism. She comes when we slow down, when we soften, when we make space for the seemingly small signals. Tightness in the chest, the lump in the throat, the sudden flood of tears with no clear cause. These moments are not interruptions to healing. They are the healing. They are the places where what was once frozen starts to thaw, and in that thawing we feel again what we once had to numb: grief, tenderness, unmet needs, the longing to be seen. All of it arises not to overwhelm us, but to reconnect us with our humanity. The feminine does not emerge through control. She emerges through receptivity, but a woman cannot be receptive if the girl within her is still bracing for pain. The nervous system, shaped by early experiences, holds memory in the body. It remembers what it felt like to speak and be ignored, to cry and be punished, to express joy only to be told to calm down. These moments may seem small to the adult mind, but they are defining to the emotional body. They shape our capacity to feel safe being seen, and so healing is not about fixing the past, but about offering the inner girl a new experience, one in which her presence is welcomed, her emotions validated, her needs honored. This process is often quiet and unseen. It happens in the moments when a woman chooses not to override her intuition. It happens when she allows herself to rest, even when her mind screams that she hasn't done enough. It happens when she says no and does not apologize, when she cries without explaining, when she places her hand on her heart and simply breathes. These acts may appear simple, but they are profound. They are the ways in which she reclaims her body, not as an object to be judged, but as a home for her soul. In this reconnection, the feminine begins to flow, not as performance, but as essence. She moves through the body in waves, through sensation, through breath, through the ability to receive without needing to earn. She emerges in the way a woman listens to herself, in the way she honors pleasure, in the way she allows herself to not know and still feel whole. This flow is not dependent on how she looks or how she is perceived. It is not a costume she wears. It is the natural expression of a self that no longer hides, and when the feminine flows, everything begins to shift. Not always quickly.